if you're watching, we're just getting Willie sorted out on his camera and mic, and we'll get started as soon as we get that straightened out. In the meantime, if you have any questions for Willie, please type them in. Donna Barr says, hi, eager to see this.
to show. It's not as easy as Zoom. So
Yeah.
it's meant for an actual green or blue screen. Oh,
Yeah. So, like I said, that's why I was wondering if I put that white. I don't. Yeah.
I've got you muted right now, but you are in the stream, Cindy.
Can anybody hear us?
They can now. I had you muted, Cindy. Okay, we have Willie's assistant in.
I don't know how.
Can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Hello.
Private chat. Can you see us? What's he say? I can see and hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, we cannot hear anybody.
I can see and hear you. Yeah.
What shall we do? We cannot hear anybody or see anything except the golden age of animation sign. There we go. Okay.
Hey, there you are, Michael.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, do you have headphones?
There we go.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Hi, how are you?
Okay, you can hear us now.
Hey, aloha.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so you are actually in the chat or in the stream.
Okay.
We can see you. Okay.
And that's it? We don't need to do anything else from this end?
Well, get Willie in.
Well, yeah. He's right here. There you go.
All right, all. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. Aloha, you guys. You know us
Aloha, Willie.
Mainlanders.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Willie wanted to do a green screen, but I guess StreamYard isn't as friendly about green screens as like Zoom.
No problem.
So we'll have to see Willie's memorabilia hiding behind him.
Okay. Well,
all right. So welcome,
you guys. Yeah, aloha, you guys. It's still morning for you, but
very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you.
We've spoken once before a long time ago.
Yes.
Well, not so long now, but during the pandemic.
Right.
You've been busier than ever.
I have been, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is good. Which is good. You know, an old man has to keep busy.
Yeah, it seems like you've been doing more since you retired than you were
You're right,
as a working professional.
Yeah, it has been a little crazy. You know, it's suddenly they realize you're retired, you're in a rocking chair, drinking hot tea and watching TCM movies. Then they start to contact you, and suddenly, you know, I'm doing a lot of Zooms, and even did a swap meet yesterday, and it was in Gardena, which is a heavily Asian, Japanese American community. So I was able to talk about and sell a few of the Hello Maggie, the second edition.
Yeah, and that just came out.
It's hot off the press, and we will be introducing it at the Japanese American Museum the weekend after Thanksgiving. And they've got a little program set up, and my writing partner Shig and myself, and along with some of the invited guests, so to speak. So
the first edition was published in 2007.
Yes.
Yeah. And the second edition is coming out with 6 extra pages with some material on. You want to talk about it?
442 and the 100th, and the MIS, and so we could at least pay some homage to our Nisei veterans.
And the first edition that came out in 2007 is not in print anymore, so it's on the collector's market. So you're going to pay substantially more for the first edition if you try to find it. It's gone up. The second edition is going to be $19.95 plus shipping.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shipping.
I do have a look at the cover there,
Mm-hmm.
And this is you and your partner.
Yeah.
Shigeru. Shigeru is the author. Obviously, Willie was the illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys have a common bond other than just, well, let me ask you this. You were in retirement when he approached you on this.
Yeah, I just retired. And then Shig, who joined the Navy from San Francisco, was stationed down in San Diego. And so he was living in San Diego. And we virtually grew up together in post-war San Francisco. We were in the Boy Scouts, Jointman Bugle Corps, and the whole bit. And so we were very good friends. But when I retired, he contacted me and says, "Hey, I wrote a book, and would you like to illustrate?" And I said, "Well, Shig, I just retired, and I'm sort of tired. I'm going to hang up my pencil." And he was a little persistent. And so I said, "Okay, go ahead and send me the manuscript and let me see what it's about." And when I read it and realized it was his experience at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, which is one of the internment camps, I thought, wow, I lived the same situation, but I was at Topaz in the middle of the Utah desert. But basically, all of the internment camps were pretty much the same, tar paper covered barracks and right in the middle of the desert and all. So then I realized it was a story about his pet magpie, but in the surrounding background of incarceration. So I thought, well, that might be a good way to sort of continue telling the story of our plight in a child-friendly manner, because a lot of the sanseis and the yonsei kids going to school, they never heard about the grandparents being incarcerated, and so we thought, well, it might be a good little story, but publishers were a little shy about it, about the subject matter, I imagine. So what Shig and I did was just self-published it, and then we, made the rounds to like Buddhist churches and Kinokuniya bookstores and the Japanese communities up and down California, and they would take 10 books, 5 books, whatever. So it was slow, and we would go to the festivals like the cherry blossom festivals and the Hanamatsuris and the Buddhist church annual carnivals and all that, and set up a table, and we would maybe do a presentation. Shig would tell the story. I would be at an easel, and I would be illustrating the characters from the book, and sort of made a program of it. And so little by little, it started to sort of catch on. But most recently, I guess, like you were saying, Michael, once people realize it's sold out, then they'll pay anything to get back copies. And so it's kind of an interesting experience. But Hello Maggie is currently being made into an animated cartoon. And so we felt that in the content of the film, to make it much more relevant about our experience, we added the 442 and the 100th Battalion and the MIS and the Japanese American military experience, and so that will all be included in the film version.
Okay, and from what I was reading, it sounds like it's a student project of some sort.
Yes, basically, in 2019, I was invited to Florence, Italy. There's a animation graphic arts academia there, and every year they award some kind of award to people within our industry, the animation industry, and it's not just U.S., but it's all throughout Europe. And there's a number of Japanese animation directors that were honored. So I was fortunate enough to be invited, and so well, basically, right during that period, the three of us. This is Jerry Eisenberg, Tony Benedict, and myself were actually known as the Three Tuners, and we're the you might say last of the surviving old timers of the golden age of Hanna Barbera. So there's a documentary that is currently being made, but haven't heard too much beyond that. But in the meanwhile, Florence, Italy was very interested. Fortunately for me, he's an avid animation arts collector. And whenever I posted anything for auction, like in Heritage or whatever, it would sell. And I'm thinking, gee, I wonder who's buying all of my stuff like this. And so when we were in Italy, our host went to a flat file, pulled it out, and it was just full of our old drawings from Hanna Barbera. Not only me, but my mentor, Iwo Takamoto, whom I'm sure you've heard about. And I'll talk a little about Iwo. And then a fella named Bob Singer, we worked together, and Jerry Eisenberg. And it was all this great collection. And we were royally hosted for 10 days in Florence, Italy, and they had a museum set up with our drawings that were beautifully framed in this Italian museum, along with repro statues of statue of David. And one of my drawings was beautifully framed, and above it, on the stand, was a large statue of David. and David is in his altogether. And so so it was pointing.
Where's this going, Willie?
Yeah, so it was an odd place to see one of my drawings being pointed out. But so anyhow, I the three of us got an award from Nemo Land, and so being that he was such a fan of myself and the Hanna Barbera, he had a copy of Hello Maggie. And of course, one thing led to another, and then he said that he wanted to do an animated version of it. But along with Sheridan College in Toronto, Canada, we have a lot of very talented students that is also working on the film. And so it's kind of an international production between us and Italy and Canada.
And the award you're talking about, that's the Annie Award that they did.
Oh yeah, I was rather flattered and blown away that they announced this was this past February. I was voted as a recipient of the Winsor McKay Lifetime Achievement Award, and got an Annie Award. And when you see the list of recipients, I felt, wow, I'm certainly in good company because, you had all the major producers like Walt Disney himself and Walter Lantz and Hanna Barbera and all that, along with a number of people, that uh, uh, you might say paid their dues to the industry, and one of them being Ivo Takamoto, who is my mentor. Uh, Now, Iwo's story is interesting also because at the onset of World War II, like all of us, 120,000 of us, Japanese and Japanese Americans along the West Coast, uh, from Seattle to San Diego, we were incarcerated in 10 selected camps throughout the Midwest. And so most of these camps were in isolated, desolate area like desert, flat desert land. And you come from a cosmopolitan city like San Francisco or Los Angeles. Uh, Suddenly finding yourself in the middle of the desert was rather uncomfortable. And then, of course, these barracks were just tar paper and not insulated. So you had very uncomfortable climates, and wintertime, you had to burn coal in a potbelly stove and the whole bit. But getting back to Ewo, he got incarcerated uh, right after high school, and he was ready to go to college. And the family had a nice business, and so they could afford to send their kids to college. But with the incarceration interrupting any kind of further schooling, uh, after 3 years, Evo was very frustrated. He was a little ticked off that he had to spend, you know, uh, such a valuable 3 years while he could have been getting a good education. So he was kind of unsure of what he was going to pursue. There happened to be a guy in camp at Manzanar that worked uh, at the Disney studio before the war. So he could see that Evo was very talented, and so he says, Evo, what you should do is get a couple of 10-cent notebooks. Back then, a notebook was only 10 cents, and so he got it, and he spent the weekend just filling it up with sketches and cartoons and whatever. And then, as soon as he was released from, or he left Manzanar, he submitted it to Disney Studio, and boom, he was hired. First Nisei to be hired from incarceration to a major studio like Disney. So basically, he sort of set the trail for all of us that later came into the business. And one of the good thing, Michael, is our business in animation is colorblind.
Yeah,
And
that is good because you're all behind the scenes.
yeah, so uh, people are hired based on their portfolio. And
But
fortunately, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say, while the industry is colorblind, obviously the country at the time wasn't. So how is that, working in that environment where even though you guys are, have been let back into society, I'm sure they're not treating you great.
Yeah, well, the thing is, see, I was living, of course, in my comfortable enclave of Japantown in San Francisco after the war came back. And so basically, my family, my immediate friends from the neighborhood and all that were all Japanese and Japanese Americans. And so outside of going to high school and coming home, my friends were all, Nisei, Sansei guys and all. And so when it came time for me to leave home and come down to Los Angeles. I attended Chouinard's Art Institute, but the thought of going to Disney Studio or Warner Brothers or any of the big major studio was a little intimidating because I kind of thought, wow, it's the big white world of Hollywood. And so when I first stepped foot on the Disney Studio lot, and the first person that I was interviewed with happened to be Iwo Takamoto, I felt a good sense of relief, and but then when I started, while I was attending Chouinard's Art Institute, I had a fellow Japanese American students, one of being Jimmy Murakami, who later formed Murakami Wolf Animation Studio, and he won an Oscar for one of his films. And yeah, so we had a number of Niseis that were studying, and it eventually got into like studios like UPA and also Disney. And so I was lucky to start my career at Disney at such a young age, and uh, I found myself very comfortable because my time at Disney, which numbered 23 years, and then my time at the Looney Tunes Warner Brothers, which was 6 years, I was the only Asian that was working at Warner's. So when I was leaving, I asked my animator, his name is Ken Harris. I was his assistant for 6 years in the Chuck Jones unit. I said, hey, can I ask you, something personal? Uh, During my time here, 6 years, I was the only Asian. And has there ever been an Asian that worked here prior to me? And she said, well, there was one fella, Alex Allegri. He was Filipino, and he was an assistant. But outside of that, no, I was really the only, Asian. And so after I left and joined Bob Clampett, uh, uh, a fellow named Dick Ung, Chinese, came and worked in the same area I was in, layout department. But then, basically, I guess you might say I was the first Asian to work at Warner Brothers in all those years. Now, prior to the war, there were a handful of Asians that worked in the industry. But after the war, many of them decided to settle back east because they sold everything and virtually had nothing to come back to. So they felt, well, maybe, uh, going back east to New York, where there were studios like Terry Toons and Fleischer Studios and all that, they thought they might give a new start back there. And one of the fellows, Bob Kurahara, who worked at Disney and MGM prior to the war, went back east and became quite well known in the industry, uh, creating Hashimoto Mouse for Terry Toons, and he was a writer, and so and then of course a number of Niseis that went back east started working in the commercial end of it, because during the 50s and 60s, uh, animated commercials were very popular. Agencies would buy animated commercials, and so that was another area that we had a number of Nihonjins working in. But yeah, so I watched our industry grow, and then when the studios like Hanna Barbera, because of their big schedules that they had to maintain. Work was being sent out of the country, and it kind of started with Japan, and then Japan would subcontract the work to Korea, and then next thing you know, Taiwan had studios set up to service Hanna Barbera, and then even Disney got in on it, and so when they were real busy, and this was still back when things were being hand inked and then painted, and so they had to rely on sending a lot of work to China. And one of the stories I heard, how true it is or not, I'm not too sure, but they subcontracted a lot of the bubbles in Little Mermaid to China.
Okay.
But it wasn't completed on schedule. So in the movie, Little Mermaid, scenes that basically would have had bubbles coming out of Ariel's mouth when she was talking is not there. It's only because China missed the deadline. But I don't know if that was just a side story or whatever.
Can I blow you up for a minute? Just for people that might not be, I think everybody watching is familiar with you, but they may not be fully familiar with you.
Oh,
You have 71. You have 71 credits on IMDb, and that's only because they listed by franchise and not by episode.
yeah. Yeah.
Some of the properties that Willie has worked on, just to give you some idea. Lady and the Tramp is obviously your first project, right? You've worked with Speedy Gonzalez, Richie Rich, Scooby Doo, Quickie Koala, Flintstones, Casper, Yogi Bear, Bugs Bunny, Blast the Buzzard, CB Bears, Hong Kong Phooey, which you had a hand in creating a lot of Hong Kong Phooey, right?
Yeah.
Posse Impossible, Undercover Elephant, Inch High Private Eye, Josie and the Pussycats, Chattanooga Cats, Banana Splits, Penelope Pit Stop, Wacky Races, Huckleberry Finn, and I'll end with the Jetsons. But that's a significant portion of my childhood, and I imagine a lot of these people as well.
And to tell you the truth, Michael, I don't remember half the shows.
Yeah, I imagine it would become a blur at some point. Let me circle back and hello Maggie for a quick bit.
Yes.
John Murakami, who you met before, is asking or saying we should get this promoted in the Hawaii Herald. Obviously, we have a large Nisei community here.
Right.
Is there? Would you be interested in doing that? Because we can probably get you some connections.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the first time around, I tried to get some Hawaii connections at that time, but not any real luck, and to have the interest of you guys, and it'll be nice to place it in bookstores and whatever that sells.
Okay, so John, John, obviously we're on message with Willie now. If we can get him some contacts for that, let's make that happen. Also, the Japanese museum and stuff here. He's also asking if you've worked with Stacey Hayashi, which you met before when we did the interview before. Stacey Hayashi, she's the one that wrote The Journey of Heroes. And
yeah. Well, Stacey and I never actually worked together, but when her illustrated novel came out, I was quite impressed, and then I was totally unaware until we did that Zoomcast that she produced that Go for Broke movie. So I would like to meet her someday. Yeah.
When you were mentioning commercials, you remember any of the ones you worked on? Somebody asked if what were some of the commercials you worked on?
Yeah. I used to do a lot of freelance work for a company called Film Fair, and we used to do the Keebler commercials, Keebler Elves, and the cereals, and Ham's Beer I worked on, and Charlie Tuna, and oh my gosh, those are a number of, again, they kind of come and go. And then for a period, I had my own studio called Aloha Productions, and we used to do little spot commercials for our local Japanese station. NHK, and the local merchants would advertise a sack of rice at a certain price, and we would do quick little commercials for that. And Bank of Tokyo, when they were located here, uh, things like that. But that was kind of a side thing. Uh, I always, I always enjoyed. Well, I guess you might say, in a sense, a cartoon workaholic. And so, if I'm not working at the studio, I'm home working on a proposed comic strip idea, or I was always doing magazine illustrations or cartoons for Peterson Publishing, Marvel, and Western Publishing. And then I also managed to run my little Aloha productions at the same time. That's the reason why when I retired, I told Shig, no way, I'm going to just hang up my pencil. But here I am, busier than ever.
No kidding. Um, I wanted to. We look at some of the studios you worked for. Obviously, you started at Disney, then you went on to the Warner Brothers. That was after Disney. Is that right?
Yeah, when we wrapped up Lady in the Trap, there was a little downtime. So they told everyone that figure about 3 months off, and then Sleeping Beauty will be ready to go into production. Uh, but I kind of felt like, wow, gee, what am I going to do? I was a student at that time, but as far as spending money and whatever, so I called up Warner Brothers. Now I did visit Warner Brothers the same summer that I went to Disney, and the production manager looked at my portfolio and said, "Yeah, we would hire you, but we don't train." I said, "Oh, okay." So the minute I got word at Disney that we're going to be laid off for about 3 months, I got right on the phone and called up Warner Brothers and says, "Hey, I'm trained now." So he said, "Well, come on down." So the following Monday morning, I started my whole new career at Warner Brothers. Started work at a place that was known as Termite Terrace. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yeah, I remember when you telling me about this. Yeah.
But Termite Terrace was literally a termite terrace. And we were working in there until Warner Brothers built us a decent studio on the main Warner Brothers lot. So we went there, and I was there for 6 years. And then, see, I was basically in Chuck's unit, and I did enjoy animation, the actual art of animating, but I still lean more towards doing layouts and character designs and even storyboards. And Chuck Jones realized that. So when the opportunity came for me to do some of these side things, he was always very nice to throw me a bone. But then finally, Frizz Freeling says, my layout man, Holly Pratt, I'm going to start using him as an assistant. Well, he was going to train him to become a director. And so that would leave an opening in layout. And so uh, Chuck loaned me to Frizz for one picture. So I went over there and did a film with Bugs and Yosemite Sam called Prince Violent. Later, it was changed to Prince Varmint because for TV sake. So I laid out my first film or short that gave me my very first screen credit. And so I kind of felt like, wow, I felt good about it. And I figured, well, maybe I may end up being Chris Freeling's uh, layout man. But then I got a call, and this was from Bob Clampett's studio. And Bob Clampett was one of Warner's, classic directors. and
Right.
he set out on his own, and he had a little hand puppet show called Time for Beanie, and it was a local success on Channel 5. And people like Stan Freberg was, doing the voices and all. And so it was kind of a local favorite. But because Mattel saw good toy potential in the characters of Beanie and Cecil, uh, they went to ABC and sold an animated version of the show. Well, consequently, Bob needed someone to transform all of the puppets into animated characters. And so uh, they offered me that position. And, I'm thinking, gee, I'm going to get a good start with Chris Freeling and start becoming his layout man. So I was a little hesitant, but my wife was pregnant. And Bob Clampett made me a very good offer. The old cliche. It's an offer I couldn't refuse. So I did join Bob Clampett, and I worked on the Beanie and Cecil show for about a year. And unfortunately, much to Chuck's and Frizz's advice, they says, we're doing feature or theatrical cartoons. You're going to go into work for TV, and TV is fly by night, So, think about it. You might be better off just staying here at Warner Brothers. So after I started at Clampett's, it wasn't 6 months later that Warner Brothers closed down their animation department, like MGM had done, and other studios were all shutting down their cartoon divisions because the studio bosses felt, wow, cartoons could just be rerun, in the theaters. Audience still love them. They're not really looking for new cartoons. They could live with the old stuff, and so that was the demise of the theatrical cartoons. Uh, but my experience of the Beanie and Cecil was really a great experience. At which time Hanna Barbera ended up getting another half hour on their schedule, and they heard that Bob Clampett was uh, not really selling any new shows, so they invited me to join Hanna Barbera, and the Jetsons was in production at that time. But my first assignment with Hanna-Barbera was the Jetsons. And that's where I reunited with Iwo Takamoto, who,
Oh, very cool.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying, oh, very cool. That's like,
Yeah. He finally left Disney, and of course Iwo now is, he's gone, but he was the only person left that when Hanna and Barbera would sell their studio, Evil was part of the package. So whoever bought Hanna Barbera, they had to buy Evil along with it. so so now that Warner Brothers owns Hanna Barbera's library, Evil was working at Warner Brothers until he passed.
and so I'm following. So right now we're at Hanna Barbera, and you worked at Hanna Barbera for 14 years. Does that sound
14
right?
years, yeah, and all those cartoons that you read off credit with.
And I
Yeah,
think
it
is
was.
that the longest you stayed in one company or one spot?
No, Disney was because when I went back to
Oh, well, that we follow on after as an animator. Let me say, as an animator, is that the longest you spent at
yeah,
one spot?
as an animator, and then when I went back to Disney, I went back to animation for about 3 months. That's when Disney went into the Saturday morning cartoon business, and the first shows that I worked on was the Wuzzles and the Gummy Bears, and that see the reason for that is Disney, it's their first venture into doing television, and the mortality rate for a lot of small television producers were here today, gone tomorrow. And so Disney felt, wow, if we put our own characters like Donald Duck and Mickey and all that in a new venture and it fails, that would reflect Disney. So we better start off cautiously and do characters that is little known to the public. And so Michael Eisner, who was the CEO at that time, came up with the Gummy Bears, and then we followed it with the Wuzzles as a companion show. And today Disney TV is still going, going strong. But when Wuzzles and Gummy Bears was turned out to be somewhat of a success, Roy Disney Jr. came in and says, "Hey, we have our name on this Saturday morning programming, and we have such a good array of characters. So why don't we develop shows around these characters?" Which came up with Darkwing Duck, kind of a takeoff from Donald Duck, and
Mhm.
and the Uncle Scrooge thing, and Rescue Rangers, and God knows it was really something. But then, so finally, we more or less got away from trying to come up with uh, some new unknown character, but stay with the Disney characters, but put a twist on it, like Darkwing Duck and whatever. And so rest is history. So now Disney TV is one of the very popular streaming, uh, programming and all that. But
Now, the reason I framed that the Hanna Barbera question as your longest time as an animator, because you have had a second career essentially with Disney doing like promotional products, right?
yes, actually, to tell you the truth, uh, I I was at Hanna Barbera, and then a fellow named Takashi Masunaga, who I hired in, uh, he's from Japan, and so on one of his trips back, he went back to Japan and kind of making some kind of a deal, which we were not privy to until it started to formulate. He was talking to Sanrio, the Hello Kitty company, talking to them about setting up a production company uh, and an American company. The Japanese crew would come here and work together with the American crew to do this film. It was called Metamorphosis during its production. It was somewhat of a kind of a takeoff on Fantasia. Later, the film was re-released, redubbed, called Winds of Change, but you never really hear of it. But I was involved in Takashi kind of put me in charge of production, like a production manager, production coordinator, and so we pirated a number of people right out of Hanna Barbera to come over and work with us, and because Sanrio had deep pockets, money was pretty much being thrown around to get people and do this and that. Unfortunately, the project, in my estimation, just gave me a lot of headaches. So 6 months before the film was actually in the can, I resigned and decided, I'm totally burnt out with the art of animation, but I like to stay in the cartooning area. So I returned to Disney in the comic strip department. And so at that time, comic strips were still being, somewhat popular in the local papers, syndicated strips and all. And so, I was working on the we developed the Winnie the Pooh comic strip for King Feature Syndicate. Meanwhile, Mickey Mouse was still being done, and Donald Duck, and so on and so forth. But then, as you guys well know, the syndication market just bottom just dropped out because of TV and all that. So Disney says, we have a staff of artists that's on payroll, and when you're on payroll, they have to pay benefits and the whole bit. So they decided, with the amount of newspaper that was syndicating the Disney strips, we might as well just turn the whole strip over to the bullpen at King Features and let them do it. And so we got out of the comic strip department, and then our consumer products started to grow. And then, of course, as you well know, that next thing you know, we had 800 Disney stores all over the world. And because Michael Eisner and his company thought that because Disney products is so diversified around the world with different artists, that maybe we should form a group from Burbank to travel to these offices and work with their particular artists. Well, I was one of the directors of Character Art International, and my first trip was to Japan, and the Japanese market really embraces Disney characters, and of course with Tokyo Disneyland there, they tend to go kawaii, cute, everything
Cute, yeah.
so cute. Then when I visited the office in Milan, Italy, the Italians and the French and their Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck characters, they're very edgy, and the Topolino comic books and all that, and it's so different from the Japanese approach, and then of course it's different from our approach in the U.S. So my thought at that time when I was reviewing all this, coming from Burbank, I'm not going to go to Japan or Italy and dictate to them how they should do it like we do in Burbank, because they're doing it so well that why upset the apple cart? So so I came back and gave a favorable report for all of the different countries that were doing Disney products, and hopefully we won't lose the kawaii, or we won't lose the edginess of the European versions, and also, you know. So that was my last duties, you might say, before I retired. So it was fortunate that I pretty much got to see the world on Disney dime.
Can I because you worked in the products side of it too, I want to go back to it's kind of full circle for you. Tell me about this.
Oh, here we are in person, right there. Now, I was 5 years old, and my dad took me to our neighborhood theater. That was 1939, and it's the first time I saw Snow White on the big screen and in living color, and I was totally mesmerized because I've been going to the movies all along, and I would see short subject, but to see Snow White on the big screen, and when the seven little men march across the screen singing hi ho, it's off to work we go," I says, "That's it. That's what I want to be. I want to be not one of the seven dwarves, but an animated cartoonist." And that's when my fate fate was sealed at that moment. And so after the movies, we would go to our local Five and Dimes. They had a soda fountain there, and I would get milkshake and whatever, and then later walk around the 10-cent store, and we came to the toy area. And here was this guy, and Dopey was the character that really struck me. I said, "Oh, that character is great," and so my dad purchased it for me. I think this probably was about 10 cents back then. And then I took it home and put it on my dresser. And every night when I would go to sleep, I'd see Dopey sitting there, and I'll say, "Good night, Dopey," and go to sleep. Then that fateful day, December 7th, 1941. Now, all Japantown was all in an uproar. Like, what's happening? We had no idea what our fate was going to be. So one day, well, December 7th was a Sunday. Monday, I went back to school, try to be as normal as possible. And there was a fellow, my classmate in class, that suddenly burst out in tears. And then the teacher would come and settle him. Then, boom, again, he'd be. And so we found out later that he was a son of a Buddhist minister, and it was Sunday, and he was on the pulpit giving his sermon when suddenly FBI agents burst into church, marched down the aisle, grabbed him at the pulpit, and arrested him and hauled him off, not leaving word with anybody where they were taking him, where they're going to process him, whatever. It was like, boom. And so, that was the beginning. And now things started to happen. So again, I come home from school, and I run in the room and living room, and I see my father sitting on the couch with my mother, and with this real stoic look on their face. And I'm thinking, I wonder what my dad's doing home from work, in the middle of the day. Then I realized there was two big Howley FBI agents in an overcoat and a fedora hat, because it was winter in San Francisco, so it was kind of cold. So they all looked like a Humphrey Bogart gangster. And they're going rummaging through, taking things off the shelves, shaking books, and they were looking for contrabands. And one of the contrabands that they took was my father's katana sword that he brought back from Hiroshima. And of course, they were looking for, even kitchen knives were regarded weapons and whatever. So that's what they were doing. And then finally, when they left, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, and in a state of panic. And I looked on my dresser, and he was still sitting there on the dresser. So, phew. So that was one of the recollection of that period. But then, of course, when orders came that we had to pack up and leave for camp, you could only take what you could carry with your two hands. And so, the basic necessities. So I couldn't really take this guy. So he sat on my dresser all throughout the war. Fortunately, we had a close family friend, a Chinese family, that my dad says, "Chuck, if you and your family would like to stay here in the house, look after it, and then whether we do eventually come back or not, it's like yours." And so Chuck, his profession happened to be a house painter, so he kept the place immaculate, freshly painted. And so after 3 years, when we were allowed to come back, fortunately, we had a home to come back to. And the first thing I did again is when I entered the house, I ran upstairs to the bedroom, and there he was. So this guy's been with me since I was 5 years old, and I am now years old. So
Well, I know what year you were born, but I won't put it out. I know we're right about an hour, and that's what time we were looking at. But do you have time to take some questions and comments from the chat, Willie?
very happy to.
Okay, so I'm scrolling back up to try and catch up with everything. You know, you have some hellos from Donna Barr and John and Alan Lowe.
Wow,
If you know any of those names. Yeah. John commented that seeing Beanie and Cecil in that illustration was amazing. It's been so long. John also says Hong Kong Fooey is a favorite of his. Now, like, how much the design influence did you have on Hong Kong Fooey?
Well, see, when the season is completed at Hanna Barbera, most of the people are laid off, but there's a core of us in layout that will now have to start doing the real work. Is coming up with new show ideas and development. So the story guys and us were really the last ones around, and so with the popularity of Bruce Lee and the TV series with what's his name, the Hong Kong or martial arts type of theme. The natural thing for Hanna Barbera, because we always copied and always did the shows that was from something else, And so we thought, well, let's come up with a good martial arts type of show. So we all sat down and started developing our concept of what the character going to look like. We didn't even start off as a dog. We started with human characters, and we tried this and that, and then I came up with the dog character. And of course, it went through some revisions in the design. But when we finally got down to it, he was called, it wasn't, I think it was Hong Kong Fooey or something of that nature. Then we finally ended up with, no, what is the name of the character? Hong Kong Fooey, right? So it was like Kung Fu Fooey or whatever. So the network at that time says no more actors that imitate ethnic voices like Amos and Andy. I don't know if you guys even know what.
I am old enough to remember Amos and Andy.
Oh, okay. So the network nixed it. They says if you have a black character, you have to have a black actor doing it. And then we did.
That's pretty progressive of them for the time.
Yeah, it was. But then they started to realize, there was some flack beginning to happen, And then, of course, when we did the Harlem Globetrotter show, we had our lobby full of black actors all coming into audition. Then we also did a show called The Amazing Chan Clan. And then we had all these Asian actors in the lobby. So, but then the dilemma, okay, Hong Kong Fooey, now he's not really Asian, he's a dog. And so we don't want, an actor that comes in and says, and, all that. So it was kind of strange. One night after work, there was three of us, and we said, hey, let's go down to the Hollywood Bowl and get some meal. Now, this was Hollywood Bowl, not where they have the concerts, but there was a bowling alley in Hollywood that had a cocktail lounge with live show. So we were sitting in there having a few drinks, and there was a comedian on the stage. And he was funny. So after his set, we asked them to come on over, bought them a drink, and then we says, hey, uh, we enjoy your work, and so we were wondering if you might be interested in doing voiceover. And he said, hey, sounds good. So Monday morning, he came to the studio. Before he came, I went to Joe Barbera and I said, what do you think about this? I I invited Statman Crothers to come and audition for Hong Kong Fooey. And you say, hey, let's see what he does. So Statman came in, and we took him to the recording studio, and he did his bit. And then Joe heard it. So that's it. You know, there's no questions about ethnicity and this and that. It's just a funny voice to a dog. Well, a couple weeks before, there was a club in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard called the Imperial Gardens, and it was a Japanese restaurant with a cocktail lounge. But a lot of the Japanese local actors would hang out there, and so I happened to be there with my cohorts, and uh, oh, uh,
Trying to
know,
figure out a name.
yeah, not Jackie Chan, but Karate Kid.
Oh, the one that played Danielson.
Yeah.
Geez, now you got me. We're both having senior moments now, Willie. Thanks.
It was in my head while I was
Ralph Macchio.
Huh?
Ralph Macchio.
No, the Mr. Miyagi.
Oh, Miyagi. Pat Morita.
Pat Morita was there.
Okay.
So I says, hey, Pat, come on over, buy you a drink. And then I asked Pat, because now I was thinking of Pat for Hong Kong Fooey. So I said, hey, Pat, would you be interested? And he said, yeah, sounds good. So we set it up for him to come in the next day. And, so next day comes and nothing. And so the following Wednesday, I'm at the Imperial Gardens again. I say, hey, Pat, what happened? Kind of waiting to hear. He says, yeah, my agent called me and sent me over to Warner Brothers, and I auditioned and I got the part. And, he got the part for Karate Kid, and rest is history. So it could have been Pat Morita to do Hong Kong Fooey, but ended up with
I think Scatman is a good choice, though.
It was a good choice. It was, in retro.
Okay, let me catch up on some more comments here.
Yeah.
Donna Barr's initials are DJ, so she was known as Dirty John all through the time Beanie and Cecil was airing. So thank you for that. But John saying Bob Clampett did some really wacky stuff on that show. What was it like behind the scenes with Clampett?
Well, the networks were now beginning to clamp down because, a lot of racier stuff, now that it's on television, had to be censored. So the ABC Board of Censors, or whatever the group is called, they would have a kind of a tough time because they would reject gags and stuff on the storyboard, but it would still end up in the film. And see, back then, you didn't transmit. You finished the show, and the production manager would carry the film under his, arms and catch the red eye to New York for Saturday morning screening. So you had no time to make corrections. Of course, today, with all the electronic things, it's a different story. But so a lot of things, sort of got through that the network was nervous about. And I think to a certain extent, that's probably one of the reasons why Bob never got another show on network. Yeah.
John was asking in regards to the Hello Maggie animated short. Do you guys
Yeah,
have a time frame on when you think that'll be coming out?
yeah. The pandemic had a little effect. Uh, the the two schools have done all of the what you might call the major part of designing and getting it set, and we have the animatics uh, being edited to show. Now we are at a point where we need funding because now we have to hire uh, real real animators and real technicians and voiceover and all that, which is all we have to go by the IATSC guidelines, union and all that. So on the 28th of November, we will be introducing the second edition of Hello Maggie at JANM, the Japanese American uh, Museum. Yeah, and they've got a rather good program set up for us, and we're going to start doing our fundraising. And also, yeah, next weekend is CTN. I don't know if you guys heard of CTN, Creative Talent Network Expo, which they have once a year in Burbank, and it's like a 4-day affair. And a lot of the major studios and animators and all that, they're set up in booths, and then they help young talents, kids that are aspiring animators and all that. They bring their portfolio and have it reviewed and all that, and it's a very good program for those that are very interested in our business or in the business of cartooning itself. And so that's where we're going to start our major fundraising campaign for Hello Maggie. And if you guys have any good ideas how we could do that campaign over in your neck of the woods, that would be good, or it would be good for the film. Our timeline, hopefully, next year at the Heart Mountain pilgrimage that they have every year, once a year, uh, we would like to premiere it at the Sayonara banquet and surprise the attendees by saying, "Hey, we'd like to show you Hello Maggie." But in the meanwhile, we are aggressively developing merchandise, T-shirts and coffee mugs and plush dolls, all of which will be sold at the Heart Mountain uh, gift shop, and maybe even have it at Janum, the museum, and maybe other Japanese American venues, uh, and hopefully to generate some funding.
And then, are you doing some kind of crowdfunding also, like Kickstarter or GoFundMe or?
Yeah, we haven't sat down. See, next because of CTN, there's a lot of Kickstarters and producers that are getting the films also financed, and we're gonna see if we could get some tips off of that. But fortunately, we are in line for some of the uh, covert uh, grants because of the covert that the government is extending grants to some of the Japanese American uh, organizations, and so we're hoping to get a grant for that too. But what we want to do is basically get our Japanese American community, especially the young up and coming group that has very little knowledge about our experience, and hopefully Hello Maggie is the film will help to inspire some interest in that
Yeah,
era.
and it's hopefully it'll be coming out fairly soon because obviously things being what they are today, people might need a reminder.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, as you know, here in the mainland, we're going through some very anti-Asian, uh, situations, and it's somewhat become timely for me who lived the World War II experience to tie it in when I give Zoom talks with students and all that. Uh, there's a school on the islands. It's basically for a lot of the wayward kids. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't remember the name of the school, but I was invited last year to the Zoomcast and talk about my experience, and also talk about the wartime experience and everything, because a lot of the kids, they know very little about it. And of course, as many of the kids are hapas with the GIs that were stationed in Hawaii that went back to the States, leaving a lot of the local gals pregnant, And so this particular school seems to have a lot of wayward kids of that nature.
Um, the next question I have, you may not know the answer or you may not want to answer. Just let me know.
Okay.
Uh, when we talked about, like when you first started with Ewo, that the animation industry was colorblind, the question came up: was the pay scale colorblind?
Well, actually, because the cartoon industry is unionized, everyone starts at the same fee, and with every increase, there's a category which is dictated again by the union contract. So uh, the beginning portions you stay within the union contract. Then once you reach uh, the premium stage, then now you go in and you negotiate with the producer or HR or whoever. But see, back then we never had such a thing as HR. It's all new to me. But yeah, and so some with some of the Asian guys in it today, they're making top dollar because their uh, artistic skills, and then uh, especially with CGI, their knowledge of working with the computer and all that. So it's like a whole new category that it was way. I'm still the old 2D hand thing. Oh, I mean hand painted. But
Right.
yeah, you get to a certain status within the business, and when you make changes, they know you're already making this, but in order to get you, they'll have to offer you this, and so it's been good for us.
Now this is a typical con question here, but
Okay.
John's asking: is there a character you really enjoyed working on?
Well, of course, when I was at Warner Brothers, uh, those were really the characters I really, really enjoyed, and especially like when I worked on What's Opera Doc with Elmer and Bugs as Broomhilda, and the
Kill the wabbit.
yeah, and then uh, working on a film like One Froggy Evening. That's a one shot, so it's a new character it's not like the Coyote Roadrunner or Daffy Duck that I've worked on in many different pictures. It was a whole new character, a J. Michigan Frog, and I wasn't too sure, you know, how this film is going to turn out until after it was completed, and then they ran it for the whole staff because we had 3 units at Warner Brothers, and every time one of the units would complete a film, they would run it for the whole studio. And then, one foggy evening was like a one shot, and we weren't quite sure. And of course, uh, it took me a couple of screenings before I really got it, because it's sort of in pantomime, and you have to kind of follow the pantomime. And then I realized, my gosh, this thing is really going to be a hit, which it became.
Yeah,
So
and Michigan J. Frog was the face of Warner Brothers for a long time, right? Like
exactly,
he was like their
yeah,
mascot.
that's right. Then they did subsequent ones by not under Chuck Jones's direction, and it kind of lost it. So it has a lot to do with who directs it and who animates on it.
Um, Alan Lowe says, Willie, we all love you in Hawaii, which is true. But do you have any actual connections to Hawaii? Any family here that you know of, or
No longer, but of course, my father was born in Hilo, uh, and that was way back in 1906, and he had these little 127 black and white photos in his album, and those pictures of Hilo itself, and it looked like a little village or a John Wayne western in the middle of the Arizona desert. And then of course he had a picture of Waikiki. It's all palm trees, and you could see the Diamond Head and that one hotel. The famous pink
John
hotel.
asks, did you enjoy working with the specific directors like Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, Tex Avery, anybody in particular?
Yeah, I have to say that working with Chuck Jones gave me a real good education so far as my future in the industry, uh, because he was very prolific, uh, and he wanted all of us working in this unit to keep busy. In other words, in our art. So I was going to Chenard's in the evenings, and he encouraged it. And then, of course, in my class were veteran animators that I'm working with during the day, and then they're at Chenard's taking night classes.
Okay, got
And
to keep that sword sharp.
yeah, and then, of course, one of the things he encouraged was as uh, aspiring animator, it's probably won't hurt to be somewhat of an actor. And so I was in a East-West group of actors in the 60s, and this little group later became the East-West Players with people like Mako and some very prominent people. And I guess the group is still in existence. But see, back then there was a lot of Asian-based, uh, Japanese-based films, like James Shigeda's Flower Drum Song and Tea House of the August Moon, and a number of. So a lot of the Japanese were uh, young actors. They found parts in movies. See, after the war, many of them didn't have any education to go on, so they would hang out in Little Tokyo. There was a building there called the Tall Building, and we used to call them the Tall Building Boys because they would hang out on that corner, and casting directors would drive by and say, "Hey, you want to work a day in a movie or something?" And boom. So when I see those Asian-based movies from that era, I see a lot of friends of mine, including my own brother-in-law. And, he's playing uh, basically. Well, I guess they did make a lot of wartime movies. But during the war, because of the lack of Japanese actors, they used Chinese for those parts. And then after the war, Japanese were available, so they were able to use them. Uh, but yeah, so I was actually on stage at the Music Box Theater in Hollywood, playing in Tea House of the August Moon, and I played Sakini, which was the love interest of Lotus Blossom.
Let's see. Sandy Covington was asking, what would be showcased in their portfolio back then versus what they would submit nowadays?
Yeah, you know, it's become quite stringent because you get so many young geniuses coming out of CalArts, and they learn animation in school. So when they come to Disney to apply, they have a sample reel that is, wow, just great. I was lucky enough to be hired based on my high school portfolio. And, I had a lot of cartoon stuff. And when I was at City College taking life drawing, I included some of those. But fortunately, Iwo Takamoto looked at my portfolio and felt there was a potential. I look at my portfolio that I got hired at Disney in, and I would think to myself, geez, I would never hire this guy. So, and yeah, so the portfolio presentation has gotten to be somewhat stringent. That's the reason why they have that CTN, Creative Talent Network, where people could show their portfolios to professionals and
Mm-hmm.
get feedback and all that.
Okay. Let's see, where was I? I don't know who submitted this, but did you have any influence regarding Disney's acquiring sole distribution rights for Studio Ghibli for the
Sorry?
distribution film? Did you have any influence on Disney's acquiring sole distribution rights for Studio Ghibli films?
Oh, no,
No.
I had
Okay.
nothing to do with that. Yeah,
Okay.
but
I think we're almost. I think we're almost there. It's a
okay,
lot of comments. So I'm just trying to catch up with them.
yeah, there was John Lasseter who was at Disney, and he was a big fan of Japanese animation, and so I'm sure he was the big influence in going and saying, "Hey, let's release some of the Miyazaki films and all that."
Alan Lowe was asking, did you ever work with Kimmy Calvert at Disney?
Amy Calvert and I worked together way back then, and then when she married Fred Calvert, they formed their own little company, and I used to do a lot of moonlighting through them.
Okay, and we have a personal welcome here.
Hey, Ron! Oh my gosh! Oh my goodness! Well, yeah, Ron is one of my old buddies, and uh, Rosemary and I happened to be coming to Maui, and Kit and Ron was planning on getting married in Maui. So we stood up for the two of them. Nice ceremony right on the beach, and then a nice luau later, and it was good times. And Ron and I hung out together in Hong Kong.
Ron also enjoyed the meritocracy at Disney before HR took hold of in the late '80s. Could you share your observations of working in the industry in the '90s?
In the 90s, I think, let's see, that was a period where, um, let me see, things were beginning to happen in the industry. And I guess you might say a beginning of another renaissance. First of all, when Disney uh, came out with 101 Dalmatian and developed the Xerox system, at Hanna Barbera, we were still inking and painting and sending all the work abroad. And so schedule-wise, it was hard to maintain, and of course, a lot of the work got rather sloppy. And so we were using Xerox printers, and and the guy there at the studio would take these old Xerox printers that were sort of run its course and started converting it so it'll use images on cells, and in the start of the Hanna Barbera Xerox system, and so my thought during that period was, wow, things are changing. First of all, ink and paint is going to be totally eliminated, and so we're going to have a lot of girls with talent, but never got the opportunity to work on the board simply because of their gender. And so
Yeah,
suddenly,
we had an interview with Trina Robbins yesterday in the comic side, and talking about kind of that.
oh yeah, right, yeah. In fact, when I used to attend the early days of the San Diego Comic Con, Trina Robbins was one of the very few girls that were there. It was pretty much a male-orientated convention. So once in a while, if a girl happens to be there, all the guys are, hey, there's a girl here. Where is she? Crazy days.
All right, one last question, and then we'll do some pitching. Again, I don't know who the user was, but they asked they'd be interested in an anthology book of your sketches of freelance stuff no one has seen with annotations. Do you have anything like that, or would you be interested in making something like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get.
They'd be interested in an anthology book of your sketches of freelance stuff that no one has seen. Like, do you have anything like that already, or would you be interested in making something like that?
Well, sure. I'm always open to getting involved with something new. And Ron, I hope you get yourself reacclimated into, because Ron is such a fine artist, and see, we used to send them abroad to, like, for instance, Bangkok, Thailand, where the factory for the fine Disney collectibles were made. And Ron would be one of the guys that would, I guess, go and check quality control type of thing. And then, of course, he was in our Hong Kong office. So, yeah, come on back to the business, Ron.
That's it. Thank you for your time, Willie. It's a small convention. We're nobodies here in Hawaii, but we're glad that you agreed to do this with us.
Thank you.
Haven't talked to you before with Comic Jam Hawaii Group. You are selling stuff at the convention. What is it? It's prints, pastel prints, right?
Yeah, it's I draw it originally, and then to enhance the line, I just run it through my copy machine with the density, heavy, so the lines would come out. And then plus the fact that I work with smudging pastel, so if it's just a pencil, I'll do a lot of smudging of the pencil line, unless I spray it and do all that.
So it's a print and then with pastels on top.
Yeah,
Hand colored.
it's all hand colored. But,
so I'm picking up a Hong Kong Fooey from you.
Yeah, I know.
I encourage other people to go check it out. He's got a lot of cool stuff in there. And then the Hello Maggie is available now, right? The second edition.
Yeah.
If you follow Willie on Facebook, you can see some of the pages that have been added. Anything else you'd like to pitch before we let you go?
Well, I think eventually, once all of this pandemic thing is eased up and everything, and then you guys have your in-person convention, I would love to come over.
Okay. And then we'll say thank you from there. Just say aloha, Willie.
Aloha, mahalo, and aloha.